All right. Uh, Good morning, Mr. Michael. We are very excited to have you with us. And this is Neha Talika from Atlanta. And I'm sure wide audience across the globe will be watching this live or recorded. And my target audience for this video interview or sharing the details with you will be students from different universities like Nagarjuna University, Siddhartha University, Mizoram, and other Mahila universities back home, as well as the working professionals across the globe. There are people who are trying to get into the IT field, or there are people who are already in IT, wanted to, go to the next level, or the team, the entrepreneurs, or the companies who wants to do business with government. So the audience and the stakeholders of this particular conversation will be a wide range of people across the globe, not just limited to India or US. Um, Folks on the for folks watching this conversation, I'm really happy and excited to introduce Michael Hiles, who is a nationally recognized expert in information governance, risk and compliance, digital assets, and cryptocurrency, the hottest topic ever in this century. And with over 40 years of software and development, data architecture and development experience, Michael brings began developing a software on mainframe systems as early as in 19s, and also started delivering the things in late 70s. So Michael began his career in the early 1990s as a software developer for government information systems. In 2000, Michael's team won Smithsonian Laureate Award for being the first ever to connect a judicial system to the World Wide Web. How exciting and fascinating. And I have so many questions to touch that topic as we go. In 2017, Michael founded 10XTS, the leading market infrastructure solution provider for interinstitutional decentralized capital market, which is another hottest topic, and infrastructure in decentralized capital market. So many questions will be raising their eyebrows how to deliver this and how one can get some niche area into this. So we will get there. The flagship product XDEX is a universal tokenization arc layer for digital securities that enable portabilities between institutions, ensuring compliance and data ownership by securities issuers. We will have to learn a lot more from Michael, and also don't forget to follow him on Twitter, Michael Hiles. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Sneha. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I have a couple of questions, and when I was going through your profile and latest tweets, and they are very, very fascinating, not just from the technology aspect. There is also a social concern that reflects in your tweets, and staying on contemporary topics and how technology can address what are the technology choices, wise versus bad. That's what I could sense out. You're very explicit, uh, very open about your choices as well. So I appreciate that not many people really speak their mind on Twitter. So
thank you. It's a difficult balance to try to be socially relevant, but not overtly political in any one particular way. So I'm an advocate of the technology. How can technology advance human capabilities and efficiencies? So that's really my vantage point, is very apolitical. I'm all about the advancement of human society, and I've watched it happen through my own experience and career and perspective. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate the fact that you're out there. Somebody reads my tweets. Yay!
I do, and I want those tweets to be reachable to many people, and many people should read this, especially when they are in technology and trying to balance what's going on around the world. Coming to that fact, your recent tweet is on Telegram app. Can you explain why it is a disaster, and what do you think it is so relevant to talk about that on a big social platform?
Well, first of all, Telegram is an interesting discussion. Everyone's obviously seeking solutions for end-to-end encrypted communication that allows for the free and open communication from human to human on global scale. And I think that the concerns, I have two concerns. Telegram is in a weird spot where I believe they've got an advancement of the technology, but because of the free-for-all nature of the tool, there has been a lot of exploitation and abuse of Telegram from a community management standpoint. There's a lot of spoofing of accounts and spamming and just lots of bad behavior, which I don't know that in a completely ungoverned, decentralized world, we have a human code of ethics or behavioral solution to address that necessarily. But then, when you start talking about the company of Telegram and the institution, it is still highly centralized, and there have been allegations in the past of, participation between the owners of Telegram and certain global political interests and governments, which may or may not be favorable to human rights or an open society type of discussion. I'm not here to cast any judgment on that. I know what I have observed and witnessed in my observations, and I've had a lot of reservations about Twitter, or I'm sorry, a lot of reservations about not just Telegram, but obviously even Twitter, right? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion in the social media sphere around centralized, selective censorship, and is that fact checking per se a function of a human bias in some capacity? And of course it is, right? I mean, now is that a directive from the top down in the institution? I don't know. I'm not in those conference rooms, but it certainly gives rise for back to my core philosophy of self-regulation when it comes to using network technologies in general. If you don't want something to be known, don't put it out across a computer network, right? Now, that's very limiting when it comes to how I communicate, but then it does go back to how do we then connect with folks on an individual one-to-one basis for that communication when it's necessary, right? When it matters. And I think that you see in the blockchain space a lot of projects where people are trying to decentralize social media and how can you create those types of community frameworks. And it's really fascinating to watch the different hypotheses of these different projects. And I think it certainly, once again, back to that balance of the social construct versus the technology enablement and can it be exploited. I think a lot of those issues are above my pay grade. I'm just a casual observer and trying to reflect what I see, be it right or wrong. So
that's a wonderful observation. The reason that particular tweet struck me when I was going through, the other tweets, because a lot of people are making these connecting tools as part of their businesses. If you look into the small businesses, and also, people are trying to reach out to all these customers, and there is SMSs going on, and there is the network of the community of the people coming together. But, we have a private tool, for example, any of the tools like Telegram or WhatsApp or anything, we are connected, but how secure this is, because there is a data security and data governance that actually is also related to that. And we are seeing data breaches, we are seeing a lot more insecure environments that, the more you get into the details, you see how critical the data, cybersecurity aspects of it. That's the reason this tweet struck me. I'm glad you touched that very sensitive topic. And speaking of that line, there is another one that you really mentioned, and it also stuck in a cryptocurrency world. You talked about the lobbying of the cryptocurrency. And it looks like, there are 320 lobbyists in 2021, which is up from 115 from 2018. Why are we seeing this extraordinarily rapid increase of lobbying in any emerging sector, and more specific to the government? And what are your thoughts on it? I know it's a sensitive topic, but I was very excited when you really talked about that topic in your profile.
Yeah, that is a sensitive topic. I'll try not to be political and I'll try not to be cynical, but it will probably be difficult for me to sway one or the other. Um, and it's not really a political spectrum conversation. It's how the government is used to develop protectionist frameworks in a quasi-democratic society. Of course, it's the majority, and you get into, how do people get elected, and where does the money come from, and how does the money flow, and Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court, and corporate lobby, dark money, dark pools. So how does the money actually get spent, and how is the influence itself bought and purchased? And I know it exists. I know that there's an entire street, K Street in Washington, D.C., where a lot of law firms and lobbying organizations receive a lot of money from financial interests. But it goes back to, well, when you see the emergence and the shift of these various financial interests, what is the driving motivational factor behind the political initiative or the agenda? Most often we find that it's tied to an incumbent technology paradigm, or really any business paradigm, right? It's shifts of business cycles, but the way things are done today are working for the folks that are benefiting the most from the way things are working today. And then, of course, when somebody comes up with a new way to do things, either the choice is made to adapt that new way of doing things, which includes things like completely rethinking your customer and your business model, right? That digital transformation conversation. Or we just simply use the law in such a way that narrows the favor to the incumbency of companies already in the space, so that they're able to more readily secure and control the marketplace evolution to continue to favor the stakeholders and the constituencies. So the mechanics of how that happens is always very interesting. But even today, right, where I'm still parsing through the executive order of the Biden administration signing the executive order around cryptocurrencies, and what are we going to do as a matter of national policy around digital assets, and how does that impact the framework? And you're already seeing in the cryptocurrency space this rapid migration towards highly regulated institutional application of the technology and interaction with the technology. They know they can't criminalize it. They can't make it illegal. Janet Yellen even said that back in 2014 when she was exploring Bitcoin for the first time, and what are the implications to the Treasury Department and monetary policy. And everyone sort of said, well, the toothpaste is out of the tube, proverbially. We're not going to put it back in. So now what do we do? And they rightly recognize that you'd have to completely shut down the internet in order to stop cryptocurrencies and digital currencies. So each government, each jurisdiction is wrestling with the monetary policy, the systemic risks, all of these various layers of the implications of the technology from various use cases, whether that's in financial markets, whether that's money and banking, whether that's commodities and trading. So the ripple effect right now, I see blockchain itself, it's a broad brushstroke of technologies, but the advent of peer-to-peer decentralized protocol level mathematically encrypted networks, call it a blockchain, call it whatever you want. That's as revolutionary as the internet was for information. You now have that same massive paradigm shift, but it's now transactions. and value and the representation of value and all of the market function that goes into the transfer and trading, and how do we fit this with the current laws that exist. And so back to the lobbying effort, it's only it should be intuitive that you've got a lot of legacy players in the space that are all jockeying to get their particular version of the language inserted into the next bill, and why. And that's what I always watch out for when I look at these things in a highly objective view, and trying to understand what the motivations and the ripple effect looks like.
Yeah, very interesting, way to look at this whole thing from two different perspectives. You being the technocrat, but also, working with the government, and, you understand the policies, and you understand the technology choices that are being made, and the cynical outcomes of certain choices. That's definitely a sensitive topic, but you really touched so many avenues in this journey of, starting something like as simple as, having our own coin versus what can it have a long lasting impact on the Department of Treasury and other aspects related to that. Thank you.
Yes.
Other question that I have is, we are talking in the blockchain mode. It's, beyond cryptocurrency. There are so many other use cases also being done. One of those is like more for the supply chain, smart contracts, and all of it. So do you really look at in futuristic way that, that it will have a revolutionary way of looking at the smart contracts, because we have these options available to do the things in a much different and quicker way on blockchain networks?
Yeah, I do. Once again, it goes back to the fundamental philosophical nature of a transaction or an exchange, and that could be an exchange of monetary value, or could that just be something as fundamental as the exchange of data, right? And so I have this argument that all logic has already been written in a software form already. It's been around long enough. Lots of very, very smart humans have worked to write lots of code. The logic might be stuck in a particular language or a particular environment, but the abstracted concept of the logic itself, we kind of know how we function together as humans. Now it's just a matter of how efficiently do we automate various processes, and then how do we become efficient with our data. And that's really what blockchain is it's a system of truth. It's a trust technology. And to the extent that multiple entities that are presently working with common data, it's the same data, but it's still siloed within their organization or their institution. How can that data be moved to a common network or a common chassis that still carries all of the trust, the governance, all of the necessary components of privacy, of private data, but rather than having replicated common data institution to institution, you're just simply working against a single common data set, which should theoretically reduce the complexities of an individual institution's own information system stack over time, because now you're interacting with that common data. When I say common data, well, what is common data, right? From a government perspective, driver's license information, right? It's your name, your address, your driver's license number, your date of birth, all of that. How many times is your name, your social security number, your date of birth, all of that metadata about you, the object, how many times is that replicated over and over and over again throughout every institution, every organization, every government agency that you interact with? And you see this phenomenal redundancy, which also creates potential vectors of attack or just human error and data entry, right? So I see that we're all working on developing as software engineers. Over time, we're all building the same program. right? Is this really the unified theory of everything from a philosophical standpoint? Or, are we also working against developing now that common data set that becomes a unified data set where it's most appropriate and most makes sense? So from a visionary state, global common processing and global storage, and you know it's tech. So with time and money, all things are possible. As science fiction writers in the early 20th century, we now have very smart watches and communications on our watches and things that 50 years ago were considered to be outlandish and very futuristic. And my mobile device has more computing power than the entire Apollo landing on the moon, right? So they had to fit everything into 4K, and I think I've got a half a terabyte of storage in my phone. So
you brought like a very interesting concept of interinstitutional infrastructure dependencies.
yes.
So that's growing and growing, and this field is catching a lot more attention, not just the infrastructure dependencies and the laws around it, and who is guarding the data, and what are the data governing principles are, and a lot more to it. When something unexpected happens, so then there is a different, I would say different kind of management that both the institutions needed to be responsible for. What are your thoughts on interinstitutional infrastructure dependencies? I know you guys are heavily working in that space.
Well, I know that the solution to a lot of problems involves, particularly from the government. The government wants to, create a new form of government, a new department or a new agency to oversee something new. I am an advocate of there being a Department of Data Standards for regulatory industries. I think that data standards, when you look at the private sector and you look at past efforts to develop data consortiums and data standards, I talking about going all the way back to object-oriented programming, and how do you get an industry to agree on a set of open standards. No single institution is capable of actually developing a common interchangeable set of data standards, because in the end, decentralization is really not in alignment with the mission of a lot of centralized institutions. So data control, data ownership, not making that data portable from institution to institution becomes once again a sort of a protectionist market approach on the private sector side. And then when you seek guidance from the the government for regulatory compliance, they start with the law and they say, well, you have to have this, but they don't necessarily, and rightfully so, they should not specify specific technologies in the law, right? I mean, technology moves at light speed and changes all the time, and the law never changes, right? So we need to really codify the framework at the legal level, but then there still has to be some definition of guidance, whether that's because of the intersect with a government reporting system. I use EDGAR, for example, for the Securities Exchange Commission as their primary, common reporting platform for financial data for companies and securities. So they have this defined data standard, and you can electronically file your 10K or your 10Q as a company, and they developed a pretty good standard of XML based data definitions. But once again, the technology has evolved so quickly and rapidly, and you've got a lot more granularity in data elements and data use cases that, like even the SEC and EDGAR at this point could use a pretty significant overhaul and an upgrade of their data architecture, right? It doesn't accommodate lots of the decentralized securities and decentralized capital markets and open banking. The Treasury Department doesn't have an open banking standard. That's still left to the industry to kind of come up with on their own. Europe is ahead of us in the United States when it comes to open banking types of data interchange and standards, and you see companies that are out there doing a great job. Plaid, for example, great company. What they do is very simple, right? They connect with 300 institutions for direct account integration and interface for e-commerce providers that want to allow a customer to connect their bank account to their e-commerce system, right? And it's that portability and it's that interchange of just that very basic function of common account data so that it can be used in multiple places across the network. And I use them as an example of, a right, in my mind, a correct frame of mind from a philosophical standpoint, but yet they even had to go out and sort of fill in the blanks with their own standard, which, I think that a lot of that can be accelerated if we have clarity, not just in the law in a lot of these areas, but then in the data standards that are used to implement the law efficiently across the, the regulatory markets and the ecosystems.
Well, there is so much more to learn about this topic. And, unfortunately, we don't have any book or guidance, or any course, as a matter of fact, in any university or Coursera or anything, which talks about the holistic perspective of, start to implement. Because everybody, whoever is coding, they're coding, oh, well, this is the functionality that we needed to do. But when we run into the implementation and delivery perspective, we run into the legal aspects that you mentioned. For example, if we have the data of US citizen data, and then the same company has their presence in Europe, so they cannot use the same cloud, they cannot use the same infrastructure. They have to have the privatized way of looking at it. Well, this somebody will only get to know when they are getting their hands dirty, not before that.
Right.
Very.
Yeah, sadly, library sciences and knowledge management and taxonomies and ontologies, those are all very, very, very boring topics, even in the software and the data field. It's like we're the nerds of the nerds, so to speak. So it's not an exciting field, but it really, at its core, from an architectural standpoint, it is the magic bullet, because it is what allows that knowledge and that information interchange. Because if you take the example, Sneha, that Bank A stores all of their account information, their customer record information a certain way. Bank B stores that exact same information, but even the data model, the data architecture is completely different, right? So now that seamless portability institution to institution just simply doesn't exist. Well, to make it exist requires that metadata layer that is the index that points, say, okay, that data element over here at Bank A, that actually correlates and maps to this data element over here in Bank B. I think, well, that's an API, right? Well, but there's no common standard for that API necessarily for that particular function. So,
and you touched the API concept. So even in the airline industry, or you are working with the partner airlines, in this case, in the different banks, then when we are trying to have that connectivity through APIs, we will see APIs are built and built and built, and never has the concept of global reusability applied to it.
that's right.
About the API factories, but that's like a huge implementation issues that both the teams will run into when they're working on this.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
and there
See,
is
I'm old enough, I remember object factories, right? So you had object modeling and object factories, and it kind of fell out of favor with the web, but it really still persists from an architectural viewpoint that, like I said, all logic has already been written already. It's just a matter of figuring out how to extract it from this silo over here and move it, to this application over here.
this actually reminded me of one of your other tweets, like, if we were able to connect point A to point B, the product development is done. But when you apply the monetization to that concept, the whole logic dies. So what are your thoughts behind that? I understand, from the system perspective, but what triggered you to make that statement? I mean, obviously it is true, because it is related to the budgeting, it is related to ROIs that we are talking about. And 9 out of 10 times when we actually build a business case, we say how many heads, how many months, and okay, by this software will live for 5 years, so we will get the ROI starting from 2.5 years. But that's not all of it, and that's a miserable budget planning that 90% of the companies do. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, when I said that commercialization is where good logic goes to die, it really is that. There are so many factors that go into the success of creating a software company beyond the applicability of the product itself, right? The core software function of the product. The product is never just the software, right? It's the story, right? It's me presenting it to a prospective customer to buy the story. What's the value proposition? We don't ask our customers to read GitHub repositories and decide to use this product, right? I mean, it's like, oh, well, that's perfectly efficient code. Yes, let's use that. Right? That's not how it happens. And so you might have a great product, and the history of technology is littered with the carcasses of awesome products that never made it commercially because of all of those other human factors and those intrinsic business factors that had nothing to do with the efficacy of the engineering of the project itself, right? It died because of other factors. And and it gets into commercialization strategy, right? And what is a customer willing to pay for the return on this value proposition? And what is the ROI cycle to pay for something? Certainly SaaS computing and cloud software applications have moved the needle. You used to have to contemplate total cost of ownership of, well, how much is the hardware going to cost? How much is the data center going to cost? How much is the network engineer going to cost? Because we didn't have Salesforce to run our CRM, right? We had to go and buy a bunch of servers to go build Salesforce and hire coders to sit in an office cubicle and write the code to make our own CRM. And so we've certainly moved the needle, but it's unfortunate because I believe there's a lot of great products that went to the grave and have even resurgent relevance, because all new technology is just essentially a rehash of old technology, right? Even blockchain, right? There's nothing necessarily new and novel about the pieces and the parts of blockchain. It's just the way that they were combined to forward this new type of solution and the application of what's really a very expensive database, but that's all it is, right?
Yeah.
It's inefficient and it's very expensive, but very necessary for certain applications. So
That's good. So you have a very interesting IT journey of 4 decades in a way, but how was your first excitement to be the part of real digital transformation in early phases, right? When you actually coded the, entire judicial system to be on the web. So I would say that's the first way of, first generation digital transformation. I may be wrong, but in my mind, I was thinking that's first time we are migrating something into that. And after that, it took revolutionary change and where we were to where we are and where we are going to be.
So I have to back up because I look at digital transformation as a child of the computer age, literally, right? So I was not the pioneer, the guys building the mainframes, but I was using the mainframes as a child. So I have a warped sense of normalcy relative to the era and when I was doing these things. I didn't know that other kids didn't get on mainframe computers. It was just a normal thing for me. I got lucky. My dad worked in the software industry very early on, and so I was exposed to computing as a child in elementary school. And that was an era where everything that you did was a digital transformation project, because you're taking what was either a human powered process or a manual process of some sort, and you're applying automation and digital technology to make it faster, more efficient, cheaper, etc. So in that early era, it's not like now where all code has already been written or all logic has already been written. We were actually writing it back then, right? And this was in an era where we didn't have Stack Exchange to go out and look up a problem on, right? They didn't have the internet for knowledge about logic philosophy. And you had to read like real philosophy books to sort of make that correlation between the existential nature of how we define the world around us as human beings, and then translate that into, of course, language and, the fundamentals of knowledge, and then apply that philosophical construct to now I'm using a tool to move us from uh, cave paintings in Europe with, paint on our hands of, the earliest, cuneiform tablets and ziggurats in the Mediterranean, and, Sanskrit, and, all of these other ways that we've captured knowledge throughout human development. But I never really recognized it personally as, what I'm doing is new and novel every day. It was a fantastic project to work on, and, to find out after the fact that we were the very first to ever do this thing. But that was yet another, in my mind, just another first of, well, I used a tool to solve a problem for this person or this company, right? And so, but that was a bellwether moment, because at the time, mainframes were all that you had in government, courthouses and courts and government offices. You didn't even have PCs, a lot of PCs back then. It was still, very much the advent of client server and PC computing. And then you have the web come along, and, we're thinking through, you know, how do we make this information that is public record? How do we make this widely available to the audience of the public, right? And what does it take to build a bridge between the traditional mainframe system and then, the browser at the time? How can we go in and do a case search and look up? Now every court has it, right? There's a go to your local clerk of court's website and be able to look up a case and, e-file and do all of these things. So that was really just an exercise of making things more efficient, because the clerk's office would get phone calls from law firms asking about very basic docket information about a case. And so you had to call somebody. They'd put you on hold while they typed on the computer and looked up the record. And then they read off what you needed to know over the phone. And so even though we had computers and we had, databases and information, it was still taking it to that next self-serve level of being able to provide a fully automated access to that recorded information by a user on demand. And that was really what drove that need from an efficiency standpoint. How do we use computers to do more with less? How do we make it faster, cheaper, more automated?
Absolutely. Even in early 2000s, right? So the Department of Corrections didn't have their files, electronically transferred to parole. So parole people ran out of jail space.
That's right.
Corrections and parole. I'm quite aware of your talking. It's an interesting thing, how just electronic data exchange between two different departments within the government also can improve the efficiency of the resources, including jails here.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I have another question. So we know we are talking about digital transformation. What is your vision look like for next 5 years? What kind of major changes and challenges that the IT community will face as part of this digital transformation?
Talent is still a big one. There are far fewer engineers than what are presently needed across all industries in every global market. It's a pretty safe bet, even though people say, well, artificial intelligence will, create the software will write itself, right? And to a certain degree, that's probably true later on down the road. But there's still a lot of instruction and data set that needs to be developed, at least for the next immediate, say 10 years. There's just a backlog, right? And unless there's some systemic catastrophic event that resets society a few hundred years or something, which I know, current global politics are once again scary. Me as a Gen X, we grew up with the Cold War, so we were hiding under our desks in nuclear drills at elementary school, like the desk is going to protect us some way. But it is a stark reality. Human beings suck. And that's why I trust math, not humans. and I think that if we're able to hang on and not vaporize each other because we don't share the identical emotional triggers and perspectives, that there's still going to be a great need for engineering and a great need, and there's just simply not enough of them. And I think our education institutions are I went through this, as a challenge, because when I entered college age, what they were teaching in college was not relevant to what I was working on. They were still very far behind and antiquated. And I think through the curriculum development environment at the institutional level, it doesn't lend itself to adapting quickly to innovations in broader technologies. And, I even watch like the blockchain clubs, like at universities. Very few universities actually have a blockchain engineering program. And for whatever reason, right? They may or may not want one or whatever. But I just watch how the enthusiasts within those universities form their own environment and their own community and start to experiment and work with these things. They're doing that organically ahead of the institutionalization of what the curriculum even needs to look like to serve these students' needs. Right? You have kids that are interested in writing Solidity scripts for smart contracts. Meanwhile, they're stuck in, some, Pascal, or well, not Pascal, but Python class, which is Python's very important, right? I mean, I'm not favoring one technology over another. I'm just saying that, the institutionalization of the curriculum takes a lot longer than even what the technology trend or the technology cycle may reflect in the private sector. And somehow or another, we've got to get to a more responsive, faster cycle for the institutionalization of those curricula to churn out developers that, starting at the core, have wonderful critical thinking skills. Right. Sometimes I wonder about just teaching critical thinking all by itself as a competency, as opposed to, the tech and the applied side. But, I really challenge institutions to figure out how to become more responsive to meet these needs. And it's a tall order. I get it. I understand it from a institutional standpoint. Making those decisions are very complicated, and resource allocation and approvals and committees and all of that needs to go into establishing a curriculum. But somehow or another, we've got to get to the point. I use my own children as an example. Of course, my kids have been immersed in technology since they were infants. I had a tablet in my kids' hands at 18 months old. And they've grown up in a world where all information is readily available to them instantaneously at all times. And when they want to learn a skill, they just go out and YouTube. It's like my son is learning how to do, he's 12, and he's learning how to do stop motion animation videos with his Legos, and has all these sets created with his Legos, and he's taking one frame image at a time and adjusting everything in the set, right? And then he's going into a video editor and adding his soundtracks and all that stuff. And I was amazed because all I ever did was just encourage him, if you want to figure something out, go do it, right? And like, where'd you learn all this? And he's like, oh, I just watching YouTube videos of other people. I learned this piece here, and this. So in the right construct, when you have that immersion in knowledge and that free-form ability to figure it out and adapt, but it comes back to intrinsic motivation, right? Skills can be learned, but that intrinsic curiosity to learn and then to apply that and put forth that effort, that's really the dividing line for me. I'll take somebody that has zero skills, but they're dressed for the game every day. They want to learn. They're passionate about solving the problem. And then we'll figure out how to get them onto the playing field somewhere, somehow.
You touched like really two cool points: academic and industry interaction and the gaps. And that's always there, regardless of which university we take it. But there are some universities a lot more flexible and adaptable to reflect the ones. And when it comes to the resources that you touched, then obviously there is autonomous colleges back home in India, so they are a lot more flexible than the government universities, but they have a huge resource issue going on, and they don't have the trained faculty members to teach the students to the latest curriculum. That's where they have like co-curricular clubs, and then there are other activities that they
Mm-hmm.
can join, learn the skills on their own. It could be as simple as YouTube, right? So I mean, start. There are so many open sources out there where the kids can start. I mean, not kids, this college students also can start experimenting, and they see a problem. They can actually start thinking about how they can provide a solution. And I've seen a lot of enthusiastic kids from engineering background. They have built their own apps and put it on App Store as well. So
Great. That's awesome.
that's growing, but it's still, not at the velocity that we are looking at. And
The other thing is I think just simply being allowed to fail. Learning involves a series of incremental failures, right? I mean, if we got it right out of the first try every time, there is no learning, right? It's I have to touch the hot stove to know that that's hot. If I touch the stove, it will burn my hand.
yeah,
And I think there's a lot of reluctance at the institutional level from a performance standpoint. It's like, well, we tried this and it didn't work. Okay, lessons learned, but that doesn't mean you now don't also try this, right? It should not be a deterrence factor. It should be a function of that continuous improvement flow of being able to, iterate, get better, get better, get better. And I think it does come to a leadership viewpoint of not being afraid to try new things, not being afraid to actually mess up bad, fail miserably, right? So those are the greatest lessons of all.
what will be the advice that you will give to the working professionals who wants to go to the next level, or they may be confused of too many technologies are going, and there is architectural work stream, there's project management work stream, there's the product management work stream, and everything is changing so fastly and dynamically. So if somebody is in any of the specific field, but they wanted to see what are the skills that they need to acquire from the architectural point of view, or from how there are platform creation, building, maintenance, and then product management has become a lot more important in these days than it was ever before. So what would be your advice for these two sectors of people?
That is a great question. The the fundamental comes down to communication.
Mhm.
So constantly improving communication skills so that when a non-technical user is talking about solving a problem, that translation to the engineering work breakdown structure and all of the layers and the layers, whether that's a physical layer, infrastructure, data layer, metadata layer, whatever. Being able to listen and then define requirements is still a very difficult. It's difficult, right? Because you may be telling me and I may think that I'm getting what you're asking me to build and develop, and I'm nodding my head and we're all in agreement, and then I come at the end of the sprint and I show you, here's my demo, and you're like, that's terrible, that's not what I wanted. And we've gotten a lot better, a lot more iterative, moving from waterfall to agile, and and the methodology of how we manage engineering and technology development. So communication, and then understanding those project management frameworks definitely being able to work in a a structured project management environment and understand why, right? And then I think that for non-technical folks, I think it's easier sometimes for non-technical people to learn at least some of the technical skills than it is for the technical folks to learn the applied business skills, right? Because it's so granular in the engineering side. Your head's down, you're, in the command line interpreter, you're pounding out code and you're very focused. And usually every piece of code that you're writing, every application that you're writing, there's some other specialized vocabulary attached to that at the business side. And I think that a lot of times, unless you've worked in the industry, right, and you understand, use an example, compliance processes at a financial institution, right? There are certain, checks and balances that have nothing to do with technology, right? It has everything to do with the law. It has everything to do with, checking the boxes for the government, for the insurance company, for, the stakeholders, everybody. And that specialized vocabulary is distinct to that workflow of what they do every day. And I think being able to understand and get outside of your own vocabulary and learn the vocabularies of those different applied business processes, those different, industries, entire industries, right, have specialized language. And that's where it does come back in my mind philosophically to, a really epistemological, philosophical approach to, what are the words that we're using to describe the reality of the world around us, and then now how do I use that as a way to convey the communication to the rest of the folks that are building, right? The pyramids in Egypt, the Great Wall of China, all major human innovation first started as a vision inside of someone's head. And then from there on, it was an exercise in how do I communicate that vision and build the resources that I need to develop and actually manifest that vision into physical reality. It became it's almost it's magic, right? It's necromancy. It's right. I'm envisioning a future state where this thing exists, and somehow or another, I have to speak the incantations. And every time I talk to my, you know, data architect, and every time I talk to my network engineer, I'm trying to explain to them in such a way that they understand and they can build this larger sequence of, body of effort that represents a much larger development. And it's back to that fundamental clarity of communication, clarity of vision, and learning those specialized vocabularies that true knowledge is captured within, right? It's the specialized vocabulary is where the secrets are at.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of that, a lot of times when we build even in non-financial sector, even if we are building like in a retail domain or in credit union kind of applications, we really need to understand FISMA, NSAC, CCPA, PCI compliances, and all
That's right.
of it, which is not technical but related. It will impact the technical.
Yes.
It for all the working professionals environment to be able to speak the same language as the business partners and follow through what the requirement is, and then translate that in a way that it can be really converted into a technical solution to a business problem.
That's right. Yeah, and it's not language specific, it's not platform specific, it's just a broader approach to how you view, that communication. You might have a tool preference that you like to use, may or may not be relevant to the bigger picture. But once again, in particular in software and data, at present, it still comes back to one very simple fundamental. Either the electrons are flowing through the rock or they're not flowing through the rock. It's ones, zeros, right?
Yeah.
It's a very fundamental, basic form of logic: on, off. So,
Right. We are almost at our time. So thank you, Michael. It's wonderful interacting with you. I am sure whoever is watching this video will learn a lot of points, and they may reach out to you in different platforms to seek more advices. Thank
Thank you.
you. It's a very educative session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for your viewers' time and listening.
Thank you.